Welcome to Strategically Building Your Reputation, sponsored by the ABA Career Center. Moderating the program today is Kathy Morris. Kathy is founder of Under Advisement Limited and former Director of Career Counseling and Placement for Northwestern University School of Law, former Director of the ABA Career Resource Center and the Center for Continuing Legal Education. She has decades of experience with guiding law students, lawyers, and law firms, focusing on attorney training and professional development. Kathy, you may proceed with the program.
Thank you, Bonnie. Hello, everyone. Greetings and welcome again. We want to, as always, thank our ABA Career Center sponsor, basically the job board, which we hope you know about and will participate in. And soon the programs will also be brought to you by a new ABA initiative that we're calling the ABA Legal Career Central. You'll see and hear more about that as time goes on. More important today, I do want to introduce you to our two great faculty members. These two people, honestly, are people with stellar reputations of their own. And John Mitchell is also an MBA. He and Karen Summerville are both lawyers, too. John's an executive coach. Karen is a legal career counselor, and you see information about them on your screen, and you can also find more about them, of course, online. I always say they have marvelous reputations both for quality and integrity, and we'll talk about that kind of thing as we go on, but neither of them is the kind of person who's going to aggrandize themselves. So if you don't know about either yet, you'll be really glad that you met them today on the call and that you heard from them. And I want to thank them. And with that said, let me start by throwing out the program agenda, which if you've been on the calls with us before, and we know many of you have, thanks for calling back in. We go through some of the top issues in a pretty conversational way. We get to some quick tips. We take some questions. We have a moment we call Agree Disagree, where I'll throw out a concept and ask them to agree, disagree, or say why. Hopefully you'll send in questions throughout, and we'll finish with some takeaways, things you can think about and do as we leave you for today, and hope that you'll continue to learn from us on an ongoing basis. So I wanted to start just by saying that we always like to define our terms. And, in terms of reputation, because I could see you guys asking, what do you mean by reputation? What we're using today as a central theme is the commonly held opinion of a person's character and competence, merit, and achievement. And it's sort of the good name that you have in the eyes of others. That's kind of our starting point for the definition for today of reputation. So, that said, let me toss out to I guess, Karen. Let me ask you, and then if the two of you would kind of discuss this. How do lawyers who may be starting a job search or who may be at any point in their careers, how do they start to set goals to achieve the reputation that they want? Karen?
Yes. Well, whether a lawyer is looking to make a big change or a small change, I always suggest that they start with self-assessment. And by that, I mean that the lawyer should be looking at how they want to define success. So when what is their definition of a successful career? And it involves looking at some of the ways that I advise my clients, or the attorneys, all of my clients are attorneys. The way that I advise them is to look at past accomplishments. That can often suggest their definition of success. I also urge them to look at values. And for someone, for example, who values lifestyle and for whom work is not the most important thing in their life and also has a social justice bent, a large firm context might not be right. And for someone else who values a challenge and wants to be known far and wide for a particularly narrow practice area, they may need to be in a large firm environment. And another aspect of self-assessment that I've only come to appreciate after having done this work for many, many years is that we are also born with talents and we acquire skills. And when we use our talents and our skills together, that's when we're the most powerful. And so in a self-assessment, and it doesn't have to take weeks or months to do, it can be accomplished fairly quickly, but it is the place to start.
As they think about, as you just mentioned, and also how they want to spend their work week, you know, I think there's a kind of a cool series of questions to ask yourself in the article that we have posted in the course materials by Karen. It's called Career Success and Satisfaction, and it's really very nice and comprehensive. But starting on page 22, I think it is, onward, you'll see some questions that you can ask yourself to help with the kind of assessment that Karen's mentioning. John, you want to speak to that, about how they set their goals?
Absolutely, Kathy. I agree with a lot of what Karen has said. I think that it's really important that you do a self-assessment. What's important to you? And one of the things that I encourage people to think about is, you know, going back to the basics and thinking about the big picture. Do you want to have a reputation, regardless of what substantive field you're in, as that lawyer who listens, that's that lawyer who isn't pushy? Are you the person that, you know, isn't out there trying to sell everybody? And those are characteristics that may or may not be important to you, but if they are, those are things that you can focus on that can be helpful to you regardless of what area, you know, you pick to practice in. Taking this a little bit further, think about the type of reputation you have and the scope of it. You know, do you need a national reputation to do what you want to do in your career? Some of you will definitely need to have a national reputation, but for others, a local reputation will suit you far better. And so making the decisions about where you want to have your reputation go is important because it helps you figure out where you're spending your time. Another example is, you know, what's the type of lawyer you want to be known as? Are you that bulldog that has a reputation for just scorched earth, you know, every piece of litigation you touched, it's an all-out battle? Are you that lawyer who's got the respect of opposing counsel, and even though they know you're going to fight hard, they respect you because of how you behave? Those are decisions that we all have to make. And Kathy, do we have time for a quick story on this?
Yeah, I'd love that. I think the audience would like that too.
So let me give you a true story about a Massport lawyer. She was from the upper Midwest, and she had a lot of cases that were running all across the southern part of the United States. She was one of the few female lawyers who were involved in these cases. And what she would do, she was on the defense side, and what she would do when these cases were filed, they're always big, they're always contentious, and they always had a lot of dollars, you know, at stake. And it was testy between the lawyers on both sides. But one of the things that she figured out early on was instead of doing everything by video, including the video depositions that were often taken in these cases, she'd jump on a plane, fly down, meet with the opposing lawyers, attend some of the depositions in person. And she started to develop this reputation as somebody who was tough as nails, but very, very reasonable. And as a result, she ended up getting a lot of courtesies extended to her that benefited her personally and benefited her client, because the plaintiff's lawyers all felt like she was somebody, while she was going to fight hard, she wasn't a jerk, and they felt like they could work with her. And that really benefited her over time, and that's the reason I think she's focused so much on building that reputation with opposing counsel.
Yeah, that's interesting. So she gets this, you know, mutual respect by literally going that extra mile. Now, not everybody can do that, but Karen, maybe do you have an example, or maybe a different kind of example that will help illustrate what we're talking about in terms of setting your goals to achieve the reputation that you want?
Well, there's kind of a flip side to this, because as John was talking about, some people will need to have a national reputation. But I work with attorneys who are looking at really defining their reputation in a much smaller scale, so that it may be just the Puget Sound area, which is surrounding Seattle. And when they're doing that, they can use a lot of the same techniques that John is talking about. In fact, I think we probably forget to do this when we're local. We think, oh, well, this person may know me. But of course, the Seattle market, as many markets, are growing so rapidly that we don't actually see each other face to face. And maybe I can tell a story about this, where when I was still practicing, I was in Ketchikan, Alaska, which has a bar of, at that time had a bar of, I think it was 11 lawyers. And they met every Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock at a local cafe. And when I was up there once, I was invited to join them. Unfortunately, I couldn't. My plane was leaving. But this was a wonderful way. There were lots of courtesies extended to each other because they all knew each other. When you're in a larger setting, that isn't going to happen. And so when John's talking about getting on the plane, when you're in your own environment and you want to gain a reputation for being tough, but also fair, and maybe you want to develop a reputation for being more collaborative, what better way to do that than to call up someone and say, I'd like to join you for a cup of coffee. And it's even easier to do when it's local. So building your reputation, you can be preeminent on a local level, on a national level, or an international level.
Mm-hmm. Kind of assessing sort of the steps you want to take to be recognized as you wish and as will best help your practice. John, any other thoughts before we go on to talk about some of those actual steps? Any thoughts more about assessing?
Yes. One of the things that I think is really important is thinking about what reputation you want to be known for with what group of people. So all of us as attorneys have different stakeholders in our lives. We have clients, for instance, and then others as well. So let's just take a hypothetical lawyer here, criminal defense lawyer, who has a local practice. That lawyer probably wants to develop a particular reputation with clients, probably a slightly different reputation with the prosecutor, and probably an even still different reputation with the local judges. And I think it's important that you focus on building your reputation with any group of important stakeholders that affect your practice. So again, coming back to our criminal defense lawyer, think about it. If you're a criminal defense lawyer, you want to be somebody who the prosecutors see, again, someone who's tough but is going to be polite and courteous so that they work with you, so that you can get an extension of time, so that you can get whatever it is that you need without having to file a whole bunch of motions to get it. When you think about the judges in your local community, you definitely want to be known as somebody whose word is good, as somebody who's always prepared. And at the same time, you need to be smart and be that lawyer who, if there's a point that absolutely has to be conceded, you don't go toe-to-toe with the judge on that point. You actually concede it and move on to a point that is more defensible, because that builds your reputation with the judge. And so I think that's really, really important. I think with your clients, how do you want to be viewed? Most criminal defense lawyers want to be seen as a really straight shooter who yet is still approachable to their client base, and especially to their clients' families who are often interacting with that lawyer if the client happens to be behind bar and isn't making bail. So that lawyer who can speak plain English, tell them what's going to happen, tell them what their chances are. Every defendant in a criminal case wants to know, am I probably going to jail, because I got to prepare myself if I am. So these are all the things that as you're thinking about your reputation, think about the different constituencies or stakeholder groups out there, and think about how you might want to or need to tailor your efforts to each of those groups.
That's so interesting. It's kind of thinking about all the reputational aspects that you have to kind of integrate and square. I think that, it's so much easier than just, how do you want to be known? You really have to do some deeper thinking. Karen, were you going to say anything? Or we can move on because we can talk about some actual steps. Are we ready to go on that?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll tell you what, Karen, I know we have a large audience on the phone of varying sort of stages in the profession. So how about when we start to talk about these actual steps lawyers can take once they've fixed on some of their reputational goals, sort of consistent with the assessments that we've talked about. Let's have you take a quick thought about junior lawyers. What are some of this, what's an actual step a junior lawyer could take in starting to move toward the reputation they want?
Well, once a junior lawyer has identified a practice area and has decided that this is something that he or she wants to learn about and wants to be known for, then the first aspect, of course, is to learn this subject matter and to learn it in the most efficient and effective way possible. And I believe that one way that can be done is to partner with someone who is very well respected in that practice area. And it might be possible for you to volunteer to help someone who is a preeminent lawyer in this field, who's who's actually quite a bit more senior, who may be giving presentations, and see if you can work with this person to draft their materials, and then hopefully they would give you some credit. If they present at a CLE or to an industry, that they would give you credit for the writing that you've done and maybe even introduce you. It could be the development of a very good mentoring relationship, especially if you're someone who's not in a firm or an organizational setting where you would otherwise get that kind of training. The other aspect of this is that I was told many years ago that in order to be known for doing something, so that your name is linked with a particular practice, or even probably for being good at whatever it is that you are set your reputational goals on, people need to see that association or hear that association 7 to 9 times. And the theory back then was that we're just bombarded by so much in the media that things are coming at us so quickly that until we see it 7 to 9 times, it doesn't register that, oh, Karen Summerville is a career counselor for lawyers. That took a long time, and apparently it's 7 to 9 times. So that was then, and I would say it's probably more now. So this is just one idea. When I talk about doing helping someone with a CLE, think about all of the different ways that you can present yourself out there to get your name and this new practice area linked in a very positive way.
And John, that's really great. We have an audience question I want to ask, but first I want to ask John, as to a more seasoned lawyer, what about some quick thoughts about how they can actually start to take a step or two to build their reputation?
Sure. One of the things that seasoned lawyers often do is they do a lot of public speaking. And I have a somewhat controversial view on this because most seasoned lawyers that I talk with say they're doing public speaking to get their name out there, and I think that's a complete waste of your time. Getting your name out there doesn't really help you. I think that if you're going to use public speaking to build a reputation, you have to be establishing yourself as a thought leader. And it's actually easier to use public speaking to either initiate a relationship or deepen relationships with your audience, and ideally talking with them after your presentation is over, those one-on-one conversations. It makes sense to go someplace where your prospective clients are, so if you're going to speak, that's where you want to be. If you're not getting a lot of referrals from other lawyers, stop speaking at every lawyer meeting that you can go to. That's not really your market, right? So think about where you're going to be speaking. You want to be places where your clients are, where they're going to hear you. And remember, it's very, very rare that somebody's going to hear you speak and say, oh my gosh, she is the smartest, greatest lawyer I have ever heard. I need to hire her tomorrow. Almost never happens. However, they might say, wow, she said something really intriguing. I want to ask her a question afterwards. They go up and ask you the question. You spend some time. You ask them for their card. You write their question on the back of the card. And now you have the ability to follow up with them later and start to build that relationship. And that's the way public speaking can really turn out to be much more beneficial for senior lawyers. And that's what I would recommend that you think about using it to build relationships, not hoping it's going to make the phone ring.
That's interesting, and not trying to get your name out there just to get your name out there, but as we're talking about, being strategic. So we have an audience question I want to pause and ask you guys, and I have a comment too about it because I saw an article that I think speaks to it, but I'll mention that in a second. Here's the question. More and more attorneys are utilizing advertising and the media. Let's not focus on social media, but the journalist media to build their practices. And the question is, in your estimation, how important is branding your practice and building that brand? And how can advertising in the media be used strategically, if so? And either of you, go for it.
It's a very important question because we see a lot of this happening right now. I think that if you're in a practice that is oriented toward consumers, like a personal injury practice or a family law practice, that advertising in consumer periodicals, radio, places where the average consumer is going to hear your message over and over and over again, so that when they actually need your service, they're thinking about you, it can be very, very powerful. At the same time, if you have more of a commercial practice, advertising in consumer type of marketing channels isn't very powerful to you. You're probably better off marketing or writing an article or doing something like that in a commercial publication that your ideal client is going to read. So I think that advertising and other types of marketing and the use of media can be very helpful, but the questioner hit the nail on the head here by saying strategic. I think you want to be very, very strategic, otherwise you end up wasting a lot of your time and money.
And to that point, I would agree with John. I agree with everything you said, and I would also add that sometimes it's very tempting for attorneys who are reaching out or stretching themselves and going into a completely new practice area, and they see that this might be the ticket to them getting the flood of new clients that they want. And sometimes it's very expensive. Some of the advertising can be very expensive, and they don't get the results that they want, and it can actually threaten their practice because they don't, and especially if it's not done strategically. So it shouldn't be seen as only way of either building a reputation or branding or gathering clients. It can be part of a very well thought out strategy, but it wouldn't be the only thing you would use to either build your reputation or to do client development.
You know, and what I also was going to add is there was a blog post. We're going to talk in a minute about social media, but there was a blog post that I saw actually on Twitter yesterday. That was a post of the ABA Legal Technology Resource Center blog, and what it talked about is it's called Why Your Personal Brand Matters. You can probably find it online. And, you know, it talks about sort of trying to square your reputation, you know, in the media and elsewhere with, you know, sort of the personal as well as the professional respect you want. One of our listeners just wrote in about, you know, if you're trying to be a toughie all the time and then you end up in your community at a wedding, and you know you're known for a person who does acrimonious divorces. You know, that's kind of a, you know, you have to think about your life as well as your work. But that's why when I introduced Karen and John, I talked about both their quality and their integrity. You know, we want you to think deeply and broadly about how you're going to, you know, build a meaningful reputation. And someone asked, would the advice so far differ in a corporate or in-house setting? Anybody?
How do you mean differ?
Well, I don't know. It's a question that came in. Would the advice be different if somebody's in a corporation or in-house and they're trying to kind of build their brand or make their reputation? You know, they have to work directly with business people on a daily basis, so they have, you know, a broader constituency, you know, in-house from time to time. But, John, do you have any thoughts? Because it might just be the same.
I do have some thoughts. I think that the techniques you can use are very similar, whether you're in-house or in a firm or, you know, in some other environment. The one place that might be different is the judiciary, just because there's different ethics rules there than for the average lawyer. But in-house, in some ways, I think it's actually even more important that you're focused on reputation. Or if you're a young associate in a law firm, it's also very important because you're always getting work from somebody else when you're early in your career, and building that reputation so that you are somebody that's reliable, that they can go to, that's not going to embarrass them, that's going to make it easy for, you know, whoever you're working with to go on vacation and not worry about the project. That's really what you need to be doing, is building that reputation. And when you're in-house, you often have a variety of internal clients who have very different perspectives than, say, a partner in a law firm might have on something, more of a business perspective than just a lawyer's perspective. And therefore, really figuring out how to build a reputation that makes you somebody who's valuable to that business person is going to be incredibly important in building your career.
Okay.
And on this subject, I wanted to also, you know, the one difference I think that does exist is that your reputation as you're developing it, and you continually assess and reassess, but if you're within a larger organization, if you're in-house or in a larger firm, your reputation that you're developing and your branding has to be with the firm's, the way the firm is branding itself or the company is branding itself. And one former attorney client comes to mind who was working in an insurance defense firm and was actually trying to brand himself as someone who was anti-insurance company. And so he was actually asked to leave. But he himself saw himself as this crusader for consumer rights. And his firm saw this. It was way before blogs, actually. I can't remember how he'd gotten it out there. But so you do need to take into consideration the branding of your firm or your company. I've worked with some attorneys who want to redefine their practice area, and when they go back to the partners in the firm and discuss this, they are told this is not the way we are moving our branding forward, and we won't support you. Then the question is, do you leave the firm and develop your own practice, or do you stay and do the practice that they are developing? So that's a nuanced piece that you do need to consider before you just take off in your own direction.
Let me move us along, because I want to ask about another it's not so much a nuanced piece, but it's a particular situation that our listeners may have. So what about, can we talk about steps that lawyers should take to maintain their reputation if they have a career interruption, like an illness that sidelines them or a hiatus to raise small children or any other reason they step away? But they've assessed and they've taken some steps and they've started to build their reputation, but how about, what to do to maintain it based on this hiatus, or in view of this hiatus? John, can you take this first?
Sure. I think it's really, really important that if there's a possibility that you're going to have a career hiatus, that you plan for it. Obviously, if you get hit by a car and you're recovering in the hospital, you couldn't plan for that. But anything else within reason that you might plan for it, because it's amazing how much you can do to maintain your positive relationship while you're gone if you plan it in advance and work with people before you leave. So for instance, before you even think about leaving, create a plan. I work with a lot of people who are going out on a parental leave. We try to create a plan. Who's going to do the work while they're gone? What's the communication patterns going to be? Who are we talking to internally so that everyone is prepared and understands what's going to happen? What's the plan on coming back so that people actually believe that you really are coming back if that's what your plan is? Those are all things that are important for the organization with which you work to have those conversations as early as you can. And then start thinking about any external clients or external stakeholders that you might need to communicate with outside of your firm, like your typical client, or outside of if you're in an in-house job or something like that. Who are the people outside of your company that you might need to communicate with about the fact that you're going to be gone? A lot of times what you're going to find is if people know you're gone and think they're not going to hear from you, they think you've fallen off the face of the earth and that you're no longer doing whatever it is that you were doing before. If they know you're going to be gone and they periodically get a message from you or hear from a colleague about what you're doing, it's as if you never left. And so one of the things that you can do is really help manage your own reputation by planning for it and executing on that plan as carefully as you can long before you step foot out the door.
Karen, any thoughts about that hiatus situation and your reputation?
Yes, I think following up on what John said, once you are on hiatus, just maintaining all of those contacts and I would stay active in the Bar Association, because that way you'll be able to stay current on what the trends are in the profession, and you'd want to stay active within your section, your practice area, and continue the relationships with the people within your organization. And you don't have to have daily contact, certainly, but you do want to make sure that people keep you in mind and that you stay current. I do work with attorneys who have sometimes had maybe as many as 8 to 10 years. And when we talk about them re-entering, and we have to, if I had been able to work with them 8 to 10 years before, I would have been able to advise them about the things they could have done during that time. And now they're scrambling to make up for all the CLEs that they missed, and they haven't talked to anybody for 8 to 10 years. That's not the way you want to handle a hiatus. It's a very good time for reflection and for self-assessment and to decide, when I come back, do I want to have a different reputation? It's kind of like going from elementary school to middle school, when you can change yourself. And a hiatus is a perfect time to do that.
John, we've had a couple questions about people sort of what if you, sort of reassessing your reputation, sort of either, let's say you retired and you want to come back into practice, or you have other sort of things that you've decided while you're on hiatus, like I want to be in a different practice area, or even if you are not on hiatus and you decide that. We're kind of talking about change, as Karen mentioned. Can you quickly speak to that, and then I want to get us into another gear.
Absolutely, Kathy. I think that one of the things you can benefit from being on a hiatus, other than if you were hit by the car, is having that time to think about your career. And it's always good to do that, and we get very, very busy. We're billing hours, we're working on projects, and we don't take the time to look up. If you ever have that opportunity, and I would encourage you to build some into your work life, reassess what you're doing and think about what you really want, because the reputation that you're building may be very, very good, strong reputation, and it may not support what you now want to move into. And so if you are constantly thinking about what is it that I want, what is it that I'm trying to achieve with my career, it lets you evaluate the steps you're taking to build a strong reputation. And there's going to be times where that just doesn't make sense. Quick examples, had a client who was very, very good private firm lawyer and was the general counsel of his law firm, known as this, strong intellectual power, and that's what everybody loved about him in his law firm. What he realized is he wasn't intellectual. He didn't want to practice law every day. He wanted to teach. So he had a chance to reassess what he wanted to do and decided he wanted to go and teach. And what he had to do is shift his reputation a little bit to make himself more attractive to a law school to hire him, which is where he ended up going. And so he focused on shifting his reputation to take advantage of a career shift that he wanted to make.
All right, that's really helpful because we get in questions. We want to talk a little bit more about bolstering or rehabilitating or changing your reputation. But let me change the pace for just a minute, if I might. And we're going to go to some of their quick tips just to kind of move it along. I think we've got first tip from Karen, and then you guys can, sort of take turns with a few tips here, if you don't mind.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. Well, one of the kind of quick tips that we wanted to discuss was about staying up to date with professional best practices as you build your reputation. And one example of this might be, it used to be that being a perfectionist was actually the ideal. And when I was still practicing many years ago, I did have a reputation for leaving no stone unturned, and the briefs did not have any typos, and that was what the client wanted, and they were actually willing to pay for someone to do that. And what my friends and fellow attorneys tell me is that no client wants to pay for that now. I mean, there may be some cases where that would be warranted, but now being more efficient is more highly valued. And I also can think of a woman who is a very, she's a very high-powered in-house lawyer, corporate lawyer, but unfortunately for her, her reputation is as someone who is a perfectionist, and the word that's used often is about kind of going too deep and being in the weeds, and that's actually something that's hurting her, which maybe 15 to 20 years ago when she started practicing, that was actually a reputation that she probably actually developed intentionally. And that's why we have to be aware of what's out there. The self-assessment, it's very much a misnomer, because self-assessment can only take place when we first look inwardly and then look to what I call the economy or the outside world and see how that's being reflected back.
Also, if you have excuse me, I think I kind of lost my train of thought. If you're in an interview, sorry guys, if you're in an interview and they want to ask you about your greatest strengths, you better be careful about saying my greatest strength is that I'm a perfectionist. I really get things right. I have a lot of lawyers I work with that think that's the greatest thing you can say about yourself, but then they're going to perhaps be afraid that, it has that downside. So as you think reputationally for job search, for your practices, your work, think from different perspectives as well. And I think, John, that's going to lead us to your tip, your first tip.
Sure. My first tip is super simple. Periodically reassess what you're doing and what you want. Reaffirm or else redefine your goals. So it's okay to take a look at your goals and say, yep, those still make sense. That's exactly what I want to keep pursuing. Or you may decide, you know what, I'm at a different stage in my life. Those goals don't make sense to me anymore, and therefore I'm going to shift them. And as you shift those goals, the way you try to build and maintain your reputation is also going to shift. And one of the things I would encourage you to do, for all of you who use Outlook or some other system like that for your calendar, put it in your calendar right now. Like literally as soon as we're done with this call today, put in your calendar, evaluate career goals for June, or let's say July 1st. And then put it in for June 30th of next year, and so on and so forth. So you are always periodically taking a look and assessing where you are. And for many of us, it's actually helpful to assess it even more quickly than that, like quarterly.
Interesting. Okay, Karen, another tip?
Yes, following up on what John has just said is that you'll want to, as you redefine your goals, you want to be sure that you're networking with the people who are now in that circle that you wish to be associated with. And so as you adjust your professional goals and your reputational aspirations, you'll want to note who are the thought leaders in this field. Who are the people? And this, I have to say, it gets a little tricky because there is going to be a sense of competition sometimes. So if you're wanting to develop a practice that might be seen as a threat to someone else in your hometown, you may need to find a mentor who is outside of your own geographical area. And sometimes it's possible to go, maybe if you live on the West Coast, to look to someone in the Midwest, and the ABA could be a catalyst for some of that mentorship or networking that can take place when you can't meet with the people who are local, who might conceivably see you as a threat to their practice, if it's a narrow niche practice.
We had a question kind of fits in with this in terms of who you kind of reach out to. This one was in the context of that question about advertising, but I think, it's sort of a good question for maybe the more junior people on the call who may, reach out to people. This question was about Craigslist. I mean, are there, I don't know, speak to those kind of new, we see a lot of kind of irreverence on some of these, outlets. Not so much Craigslist necessarily, but can you speak to those kind of new advents, and we'll talk in a minute more deeply about, other types of social media.
Well, I have had a client who landed a good job through a Craigslist, and I remember being very skeptical when she first told me about this posting, and I was trying to figure out why a legitimate corporation would advertise on Craigslist. And it was that they didn't have an in-house attorney. They didn't know that when you advertise for an attorney, you don't go on Craigslist, you would go to the Washington State Bar Association job postings. So, and we were skeptical, but we researched the company, and everything else about it was legitimate, and she applied, she landed the job, and it was very good. And I think that if you're going to advertise though on Craigslist, you need to ask yourself about what is the reputation you want to develop. And for some practice areas, that may be consistent with your reputation. You're one of the people. You're consumer oriented. You're not someone in a large downtown high-rise. But you would want to very carefully think about where it is that this is part of the strategy. And it wouldn't be right for everyone, certainly, but I could imagine that there are some practice areas that may, and I would be very careful about posting on Craigslist, but I could imagine a situation where that could be consistent with reputational aspirations.
Okay. Thanks. John, I think you had one final tip there?
Sure. The final tip I have is all about follow-up. It's really critical when you're meeting people, you're out there networking, you're meeting people, that you follow up with them, because they may or may not remember you, and we're all busy. We're certainly not going to remember all the people that we've met weeks and months down the road. So for those people where you think they might be of help to you at some point in the future, doesn't have to be even professional help, by the way. They might have a recommendation for a pediatrician or a real estate agent or whatever, or that you might be able to help, which is very important in the networking sphere, think about how you can help others, is you want to follow up with people so you help build that connection. The whole idea is you want to use networking to build relationships, not to just collect a stack of business cards. One of the things you can do with those business cards, though, is write down information about those people. Write down questions that you want to ask them. Write down questions that they asked you, and then use those cards as a tool to follow up with those folks to try to have a conversation. I personally am terrible at follow-up, and so one of the things that I do is whenever I get information, whether it's business cards or scraps of paper or little notes, I give them to my assistant, Dawn, and she then helps me both get them into our database but also scheduling follow-up so that it literally is something that is in my calendar, because then I'm likely to do it. I was a litigator when I practiced, so if it's in my calendar, I would go to court, go do my thing. I do the same thing today. If it's in my calendar, I do it. So I do my follow-up by putting it into the calendar, and I'd encourage everybody to think about that. Even if you don't have an assistant, you could put it in your own calendar.
Okay. Quickly, before we go on to the agree-disagree, I just want to harken back to a comment, because there's a question saying that we, or at least I think I said that someone might have wanted to say they had a reputation for being a perfectionist, and now how do they change that would be the question. And I think sometimes, let's take the interview context, you're not necessarily changing things, but recasting them. This is what we do as lawyers. So if you wanted to say one of my greatest strengths is perfectionism, and what I mean by that now is that I always focus on bringing in work on time and on budget. See, that's different than the idea of scorched earth or no stone unturned. We just want you to think kind of modernly, and I think that's a really good segue to really these agree-disagree moments, because they're going to get us into social media questions about. And John, so let me I think start with you. Do you agree or disagree using social media is to help build and I guess maintain, we can say, your reputation is always a good idea? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think it can be a good idea. I've seen some people use it very, very well. I've also seen a lot of lawyers use it to their detriment. And let's just take an easy form of social media where you don't see a lot of crazy things usually, and that's LinkedIn. I see people asking questions or putting responses in that make me wonder, is this person even licensed? Or if they are licensed, did they learn anything in the last couple of years while they've been doing this? I mean, some of the folks who are posting, they may think they're being cute or witty or something else. I'm not even sure sometimes. But I come away going like, wow, that was scary. So I think you can hurt yourself if you're not careful and you're not thinking about it. Like everything else, have a strategy. Execute that strategy, and social media might help. But I would say no, Kathy. I don't think it's always a good idea.
Let me ask: is the same true on Twitter? Because most lawyers think Twitter is about where people are eating dinner. But I've heard it said that Twitter can be really good for business purposes, and it's really used like 90% now for business purposes. And I'm particularly interested in your thoughts because I just started tweeting on the advice of those folks, and I'm doing this at my thing is @LawyerCounselor, and I'm using hashtags like law job secrets and legal careers, and I'm trying to make a daily post and be strategic. But is your advice different if we're talking about should lawyers use Twitter? And then I want to move on to ask Karen something more about LinkedIn.
I don't think the channel really matters. If it's Twitter, you can use it very powerfully. I've watched a particular entrepreneur. She's done some really amazing things with Twitter, and has tried to encourage me to be on Twitter, to be active on Twitter. And so she's doing great. She has a strategy, and she executes it really, really well. Likewise, I've seen people put stuff on Twitter. Some of their tweets make me think like, oh my gosh, does this person realize everyone's reading this? Not just their friends, but everyone in their professional community. And I think that's where you have a challenge, is you've got to assume every single thing we put out on any of these social media channels is being read by everybody, and it's basically permanent. So you need to be clear that whatever you're putting out there is something that is designed to advance one of your goals. And if it's not, I'd rethink it.
Yeah, because I think you had said to me once, you can try to bury a post, but you can't take it back, and that's pretty powerful, kind of cautionary advice. As I think sometimes we rush out to do these things because we think we should. This is probably comforting advice to a lot of people on the phone. So let me ask you, Karen, because I know a lot of lawyers use LinkedIn. So do you agree or disagree that lawyers need a profile on LinkedIn to boost their reputation?
I don't know that I'd go to the extreme of saying need, but I think that it's an unusual attorney who can't benefit from being on LinkedIn. And it would be the strategy around not doing it. I would want to know their thinking. Because one of the ways that it can be very helpful is in helping me, certainly when you are thinking about rebranding or creating your reputation, it's a very good medium for doing that. And in part because the way that you set up your profile actually forces you to do the self-assessment that is required to define your reputation. So it's almost built into their system that when you set up your profile, you have to choose how you want to be viewed and how narrowly or how broadly do you want to define your practice. And one exercise that you can do to kind of see how you want to shape your profile is to go onto LinkedIn and look at different profiles of esteemed and highly regarded attorneys who are in the practice area that you are looking to move into. See how they portray themselves. Look at the groups that they belong to. Look at the experiences that they have acquired. It's a great way to develop your own roadmap and set your own goals. You can look at someone who's maybe 10 years out or 10 years ahead of you in terms of developing a reputation in the practice area that you want to be known in. So for those reasons, and it also can be a tool, and I don't think that people should put up a profile just for this reason, because I think it happens very seldom, but I do know of an attorney who was actually approached by a corporation and I believe it was even the general counsel position based on her LinkedIn profile. This doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And it was several years ago, and she thought that she didn't even realize that was why they were contacting her. But if you have it out there, I mean, think of the clients can use that, and you can. It also just, I think, as a tool for helping you to formulate your own reputation, and it gives you. They also periodically tell you, don't you need to update, which is a really good reminder. As John would say, it's like your calendar, only better because it kind of comes to you and says, you want to update your profile in this regard, and that's a trigger for you to assess and reassess and look at, is this still what I aspire to be as a lawyer? And I think that it also allows you to integrate a little bit more of your personal into the profile than might be possible. Even if you have a bio out there on your organizational website, I think it's still a good idea to have your own LinkedIn because it allows you to really do your own branding.
Yeah, and you don't have to make it your whole resume. You can pick and choose, and as you said, shape the way you want to present yourself. One of the questions, and I think lawyers always worry about this, and it's a fair worry, about the ethical issues of LinkedIn. But I think they're just if they're at all happening, I think they're being developed. Like I heard that someone was worried about if you're gonna sort of what do they call that when you recommend someone on LinkedIn? That's a lawyers shouldn't sort of solicit those kind of things from each other nor give them. But I think at this stage it's still early enough in the game that just be ethical the way you would otherwise be, and I don't know that you're going to run into trouble. But watch, that's why watching feeds and things like Twitter news is because as those things develop, you'll see them right away.
Kathy, can I make just a quick point?
Sure.
One thing that everyone on this call should be careful about, though, with LinkedIn is the endorsements, as Kathy is talking about. There are some jurisdictions that have already started to look at these endorsements, and what they're looking at is when you're getting endorsed for something that you don't even do. Right? So if you don't do criminal law and someone's endorsing you for that, you need to go and pull it off. It's very easy to do with LinkedIn, but don't let people endorse you for things that you do not do, because you're then holding yourself out to the public as being competent to handle those types of matters. And that's something you can police internally yourself through the LinkedIn dashboard. You can control which endorsements you allow to be shown and which ones are not.
That's
so just
really interesting.
Be careful.
Yeah, and I want to get back before we wrap up with takeaways quickly, but there's some questions about rehabilitating your reputation, and some of the questions have to do with kind of like in the press, if you've made a significant error and you're in the press, or if people on the social media outlets might be complaining about you and your services. How do you kind of rehabilitate from that? What would you suggest? That's a tough one, I know, but I know people would love to hear any thoughts you might have.
Karen, go ahead.
Well, I mean, there is reputation.com, I think, if it's really extreme, but I think you can take some steps on your own to do more good, so that you bring. Some of those might be on Avo. I know that I've just in Googling it, or Avoing it, I guess I should say, there are attorneys who have some hostile clients, and what I can see is that it's like if you have a bad restaurant review, what you would want to do is make sure that your service was absolutely superb, so that you start building it up from the 3.5 to the 4.5. And you would really, I think it requires some soul searching. I think if you are someone who is being criticized, and it's more than one criticism, and you sit back and think about, sometimes the criticism may be totally unfair, but I think this would be a good time for us an assessment and reassessment and think about, is this a practice area that I'm well suited for? I'm not saying that that one bad review means you shouldn't continue in the practice, but if it continues to happen, I would want to know why. I would want to work with an attorney and kind of sort through, is there something about this practice that you're unhappy with and maybe you aren't responding? Those are really big clues to me that someone is not in the right practice area. And it means we need to do some very careful strategic assessment to determine what a better practice, or maybe even whether the person should practice law. And then if you decide, this was just, I had the misfortune of taking on a bad client, then you'd want to look at, okay, how can I avoid that from happening again? What was it about this client that should have been a red flag, that I should have noticed when this person came in the door? Yeah. Then it would be, I need to be a better communicator. So you would use this, it would actually be a very helpful tool for you to really correct some of the things that you might have been doing incorrectly in your practice. And then work very hard to bring those numbers back up. And then if all else fails, I think you might want to, if it was really, really bad, and I can think of some situations where what comes up first when you Google an attorney's name is so bad that if I were that person, I would actually get a third party to help me move that down on the Google search, because I can't imagine a client wanting to hire this person based on what pops up. And I guess the other piece of this would be Google yourself not infrequently to see that's an easy way to see your reputation, because what pops up first on Google is actually a huge part of your reputation.
You mentioned AVOing, I think you said that, and one of the questions was about AVO, AVVO, and I would also tell people, not enough lawyers have gone in and filled out the questionnaire. You can improve your rating from what everybody gets, which is around a 4 to a 6, to up to a 10 if you spend a little attention on their site, and same thing is true with Google and Google+. So, you can affect your reputation, although that's not as much kind of what the program is about. I do want to ask, because in our takeaways, Karen already spoke about reviewing LinkedIn profiles and whatnot. But John, I know you're big on talking to other people in addition to just what gets written about you or what gets said about you online. So you had this takeaway, if I could ask you about it, conducting a 360-degree review of your reputation. What do you mean?
So the idea of a 360 is asking people who are perhaps your bosses or supervisors, people who are your peers, people who are subordinate to you, people who are outside of your organization, to give you feedback on you. And one of the first things I would do is start where Karen just left us, which was going on to Google, putting your own name in there and seeing what pops up. So you have a sense of at least what's being written about you. And then you can start asking people for feedback. And it's easier if you do this starting with people who are closest to you, meaning they like you regardless of what their status is in relationship to you, like a boss or a subordinate. And you want to ask them basic questions, What do you think of when you think of John Mitchell? What are 3 traits that first come to mind when you think about me? If you have challenges with me, what are those challenges? And you want to get people to start giving you some feedback so that you really get a sense of how you are perceived by others. It doesn't mean that's who or what or how you are. It does mean, though, if you hear it repeatedly, that's how others are experiencing you, and you want to think about that. If you don't like how they're experiencing you, you want to try to find ways to change your behavior. I did this myself at 360. I do it periodically. The last time I did it, I heard all these great things, and then I heard a few things that were just horrifying to me, one of which was he's really hard to get a hold of. When you sell services, that's a bad thing. But I didn't have any perception of that, and that was helpful by me doing the 360, asking people for feedback. That was one of the pieces of feedback I got.
Yeah, that can be eye-opening, and of course you have to be able to ask people who will actually give you meaningful feedback. But I think that's, you got to listen. When they give it to you, don't do what so many lawyers do, and that's justify or argue. Just do your listening. And Karen, I think, this idea of change, you had a tip here about stay open to who you may become. That sort of implies maybe you're not always purposefully planning it, but you may grow into something. Could you tell us what you mean by that?
Yes, well, it's actually an example from, well, actually confess, it's actually from my own practice time. And I was the attorney who had drafted a brief for an argument in federal court for a summary judgment in federal court. And I was, I believe, a mid-level or senior associate at the time. And I was asked then to present the oral argument. And I was petrified. I was actually, public speaking was something that made me, it caused me to kind of choke up, and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do it well unless I got some help. So in addition to preparing for the oral argument, I snuck out 3 times a week and worked with a speech coach. And I felt very confident. I went into the federal courtroom. There were at least 3 or 4 partners from the firm who were there, and the client was there, and it went very well. It would never have gone well if I hadn't gotten that help. And what's interesting is that now I actually do public speaking on a very regular basis. And in fact, this goes back to a point that we talked about earlier about how, just the whole thing that we're talking about is building reputation. One of the ways that we do it is through public speaking in whatever area, and it's very hard, I believe, as an attorney to have a reputation without having the ability to speak to an audience, regardless of what that audience is. It may be just your clients, it may be a large room full of people, or on a webinar with 1,000 people, but gaining that confidence and being open to the possibility that you may be actually good at something that you don't see yourself as being born with, and allowing yourself to develop even when you've been in practice for a number of years.
Let me just quickly interject because one of our listeners asked quickly about that ABO. It's not A-B-B-O, it's A-V as in victory, V-O. It's a powerful tool, so take a look at it. Now, Karen's speaking about, growing and new strengths and even career surprises kind of gets us into your last tip there about, John, having fun, and it's not something lawyers think about when they're thinking about their reputation. And also, I don't know, tell us what you mean by going beyond the obvious, if you would.
The first point is having fun, and the reason that is so important is enthusiasm is contagious. Enthusiasm is attractive, and part of why you want to have a good reputation is so people are attracted to you and want to retain you or refer you to someone who needs your services. And so if you think about it, pick some area of law that you personally don't like. For me, it's tax. I'll never like tax. However, believe me that my tax lawyer and my accountant are both people who love tax. They find it fascinating. They're enthusiastic about it. They have fun with that. And so that's why I want to hire them. I don't ever want to deal with it, but I want them to love it. And so the more you can be enthusiastic and have fun with what you're doing, that's attractive to people. This idea of going beyond in the obvious is also really important. And one of the things that always shocks lawyers, but it doesn't shock your clients, is the power of doing something that is not necessarily in your best interest, but it's in the client's or the prospective client's best interest. It is always powerful. And just a quick example of this, I have seen lawyers do various things in the past that have done this, and one of them had a little piece that they created that was all about how to avoid having to call a lawyer, right? It was basically a how not to hire a lawyer guide. Guess what? The person had their contact information on it, and every time somebody read it and could avoid hiring a lawyer, they didn't call this guy. But when they read through it and they did realize they needed a lawyer, he's the first person that they called because his contact information was right there on this little guide he had created. So that's what I mean by going beyond the obvious. Think outside the box. Think about your client or your prospective client from their perspective, not from your perspective, and you're much more likely to find something that helps them, and then they think of you like, wow, she's the lawyer I want because she helped me think about this differently.
So that's interesting, and I think all in all then, everything we're trying to talk to you about today, and we hope you've gotten some specifics and food for thought, is, that we want you to now and continually kind of assess and build and maintain and expand your reputation, even if that means, changing it from time to time, even if that means changing practice areas. And this is a good segue because our last slides are about the upcoming programs, you may want to change practice sectors, for a better fit that better suits the reputation you want, your strengths, etc. And this is going to be a program that's about, the pros and the cons and sort of the good and bad surprises of switching sectors. And then also we'll end the bar year of programming for our series on something near and dear to everybody's heart, which is negotiating on your own behalf for the work perks that matter to you. So I wanted to thank profusely both John Mitchell and Karen Summerville. I hope you found as much quality and integrity and everything they told you as I always see in the work that they do, and I really, really appreciate their time. We hope you'll go ahead and register for, the upcoming programs, which you can do now on the website, ambar.org/advice. And we really want you to stay online and quickly fill out your evaluation for us. We always value your thoughts. So on behalf of the ABA and for myself, thank you so much to all. We hope to see you and have you again on another program.